Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more common sense. Today we're diving back into the works of Bertrand Russell. This is In Praise of Idleness and Other Essays. We are on the Case for Socialism, which is how I came to this particular study. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Exploring Ideologies, where we talk about why communism and socialism are stupid. With that being said, we are going to dive in and begin with a quick definition. Now, once again, we have the American Heritage Dictionary on the left and we have Wikipedia on the right. Any of various theories or systems of social organization in which the means of producing and distributing goods is owned collectively or by a centralized government that often plans and controls the economy. The stage in Marxist-Leninist theory intermediate between capitalism and communism, in which the means of production are collectively owned, but a completely classless society has not yet been achieved because it is impossible. A theory or system of social reform which contemplates a complete reconstruction of society with a more just and equitable distribution of property and labor. In popular usage, the term is often employed to indicate any lawless, revolutionary social scheme. It is interesting to note, I got the comment that I need to check out Fourier and Saint-Simon. I've done some preliminary, we have not got into the works yet, but it is funny that Saint-Simonism is listed here as a form of socialism because according to what I've read so far, he is not at all for governmental controls, which would put him very much in the free market side. But with all of that being said, let us talk about the case for socialism. The great majority of socialists in the present day are disciples of Karl Marx, from whom they have taken over the belief that the only possible political force by which socialism can be brought about is the anger felt by the dispossessed proletariat against the owners of the means of production. By jealousy and victim mentality, that is the only way by which it can come about. By an inevitable reaction, those who are not proletarians have decided, with comparatively few exceptions, that socialism is something to be resisted, and it absolutely is. Governmental controls of the market is to be resisted at every single step along the way. I don't care if it's communism, I don't care if it's socialism, I don't care if it's fascism. If it is the government being in control of the markets, it is almost entirely wrong. You can make the argument that the United States is a fascist state simply because of the way that we do power, right? Or water and utilities. It is governmental control of the goods, in the case, power, and they get to tell you who you get to buy from, right? And with very few exceptions across the country. I know that Texas does its own thing where you can choose your provider, right? But most of the country is under heavy regulation. You are not allowed to go from one power company to another one, even though your neighbors right down the street might be on there. It is heavily regulated, and that is why the price is so damn high. Back to the text. And when they hear the class war being preached by those who proclaim themselves their enemies, they naturally feel inclined to begin the war themselves while they still hold the power. And once again, this class war, that is victim mentality, right? In a capitalist society, which we are here in the Republic of the United States, not a democracy, but a republic, you have the ability to change your position. That has happened more here in this country because of our practices than anywhere else in the whole history of the entire planet. More people have been lifted out of poverty here than anywheres. And that is because of the free market system. For the competition that we have, the ability to make the adjustments that we need to, right? You are not held to a class. You are not stuck in a working class unless your mentality holds you there. You can become an entrepreneur. You can relocate yourself with relatively little difficulty. I understand that it is expensive, but that is really the only thing holding you back. You can get a more education and improve yourself in your employment. You are the only thing holding you back from you becoming successful in the United States of America. Your mindset, the way that you look at things, is what is holding you back. This class warfare, that is victim mentality. That is putting off on someone else the responsibility for you not making the choices for you to fix your life. Anytime that they talk about classes, that is not relevant to the United States of America. Period. The end. Fascism is a retort to communism, and a very formidable retort. So long as socialism is preached in Marxist terms, it rouses such powerful antagonism that its success in developed Western countries becomes daily more improbable. Yes, it would, of course, have aroused opposition from the rich in any case, but the opposition would have been less fierce and less widespread. Now, we're going to point out once again that there is very little difference between socialism and fascism. The only difference being the illusion of the free market, right? Fascist is governmental control with the pretension that it is free, that you can choose, but you can't because it is under government control. Socialism is everything's under government control, and they do not pretend that there is capitalism, right? They are intentionally stopping capitalism. Now, communism is supposed to be the end result of socialism, which is the complete removal of the free market, central planning, and supposed to be the diffusion of power, but that never happens because in communism, you do have classes. In socialism, you do have classes. You don't in the free market republic that we have here in the United States. For my part, while I am as convinced a socialist as the most ardent Marxian, once again also, we have dealt with the Communist Manifesto and Karl Marx's absolutely childlike fucking fervor for that over on the Ideologies playlist, so you can fall back and read read along with me the Communist Manifesto and understand why it was such a terrible idea to begin with. I do not regard socialism as a gospel of proletarian revenge, nor even primarily as a means of securing economic justice. I regard it primarily as an adjustment to machine production, demanded by considerations of common sense and calculated to increase the happiness not only of proletarians, but of all except a tiny minority of the human race. If it cannot now be realized without a violent upheaval, this is to be attributed largely to the violence of its advocates. But I still have some hope that a saner advocacy may soften the opposition and make a less catastrophic transition possible. It is important to note, especially since we did not do the groundwork video on this, Bertrand Russell was an absolute coward. Like absolute coward throughout every phase of his life. He only ran for office if he knew that he could not win it. He allowed multiple other men to fornicate with his spouses on multiple occasions across multiple marriages. He was a victim from childhood until the time that he died. He was a fervent adherer to being the victim. He loved that shit. And so keep that in mind when he advocates for no violence, and just because he was literally a coward. Let us begin by a definition of socialism. I just did that for you. The definition must consist of two parts, economic and political. The economic part consists in state ownership of ultimate economic power, which involves, as a minimum, land and minerals, capital, banking, credit, and foreign trade. So, everything, right? The ownership of ultimate economic power involves at a minimum land and minerals, so all real property, capital and banking, so all non-real property, credit, and foreign trade. So not even real, right? But credit, which is the assumption that there will be trade, and foreign trade. So everything under the control of the government. But you're going to achieve that with no violence. The political part requires that the ultimate political power should be democratic. We have several times explained why that is absolutely fucking terrible. But if you need a refresher, first off, fall back to the Ancient Lore playlist where we read through the entirety of Plato's Republic. Fall back to the Federalist Papers where we read all of the reasons why we have the Constitution and the arguments involved in that. We have done that so that you know when I say this, I mean it. Democracy is mob rule, which is tyranny. Every single time. That is what winds up coming from democracy. There is a reason why we are not a democracy here in the United States. We are a democratic republic, a constitutional democratic republic. We have democratic systems, but we are not a democracy. Democracy is, there's three of us, just to keep it easy, right? There's me, and then there's two other people. I have something. Let's say it's a phone. I use my phone all of the time. I have this phone. I get to decide whether or not you get to use this phone, unless we're in a democracy. If we're in a democracy, these two people can decide that you get to use my phone and I get no say in it. And that is the law of the land. In the Republic, however, we have the right to own property. We have the right to do all of the things that he's wanting to take away from us, but we get to decide what to do with our property. We get to decide, hey, you need to use my phone, here you go. Or, no, you're an asshole, you can't use my phone. We get to decide that. Nobody else gets to decide that for us. We have the laws in our favor. It says that we get to hold public property or personal property. That's the difference, right? I get to say because the law says, or you get to say because the mob says. We are not a democracy. We will never be a democracy. We have democratic systems, sure. We have safety nets, but that doesn't make us socialist. And even those safety nets, they're not socialist. That's a whole different argument for a whole different day. We are not democratic, and we never shall be, for very good, valid reasons, which, again, I refer you back to those two playlists where we have spent an extensive amount of time talking about these issues. Marx himself, and practically all socialists before 1918, would have agreed to this part of the definition without question. But since the Bolsheviks dissolved the Russian Constituent Assembly, a different doctrine has grown up, according to which, when a socialist government has achieved success by revolution, only its most ardent supporters are to have political power. Remember when I told you that we don't have classes here, but they do there, right? Socialism and communism, they absolutely have classes. They have the people who work and die, and they have the people who tell them to work and die. Those are the two classes. The most ardent supporters, they are the ones who tell you to go work and die. Now, it must, of course, be admitted that after a civil war, it is not always possible to enfranchise the vanquished immediately. But insofar as this is the case, it is not possible to establish socialism immediately. A socialist government which has carried out the economic part of socialism will not have completed its task until it has secured enough popular support to make democratic government possible. The necessity of democracy is evident if we take an extreme case. An Oriental despot may decree that all the natural resources in his territory shall be his, but is not, in doing so, establishing a socialist regime. Wrong. Nor can I, you're right, it is not necessarily, right? In this case, the Oriental despot would be the government, right? And by taking control of all of the things, it can go one of three ways. It can be communist, it can be socialist, it can be fascist. It depends on the illusion of choice. Nor can the rule of Leopold in the Congo be accepted as a model for imitation. Unless there is popular control, there can be no reason to expect the state to conduct its economic enterprises, except for its own enrichment, and therefore exploitation will merely take a new form. Democracy, accordingly, must be accepted as part of the definition of a socialist regime. Never winds up happening that way, but y'all keep making the illusion thereof. Democracy falls to tyranny every single time. And they knew that 4,000 years ago. They literally knew that 4,000 years ago. With regard to the economic part of the definition, some further elucidation is necessary, since there are forms of private enterprise which some would consider compatible with socialism, while others would hold the opposite view. Should a pioneer be allowed to build himself a log hut on a piece of land rented from the state? Yes, but it does not follow that private individuals should be allowed to build skyscrapers in New York. Why? First off, you get to build yourself a hut, but only on a piece of land rented from the state. Now, you can make the argument, and you absolutely may be correct, that property taxes is merely renting from the state. But you get to build your property, and you get to say what to do with it, right? And if you want to build a single-bedroom house, or you want to build a 4-bedroom house, or you want to build a 20-bedroom house, that is entirely up to you in the capitalist free market system. Not in the socialist government, however, right? You are directly renting your property from them, and they get to say what you get to put on there. He is making the argument here. Why is it different for the government to build a skyscraper than for a private individual? Because they would get a return on their investment? Well, you're a fucking dumbass. Similarly, a man may lend a shilling to a friend, but a financier may not lend 10 millions to a company or a foreign government. And again, why? Because you have decided that it is immoral? Because you have decided that it is not something that should be done? He doesn't get to make a decision about his life. I get to make a decision about your life. That's some more victim mentality shit, right? You were exploiting me because you figured out how to make money. Oh my God, Elon Musk is going to kill us all because he's sending people to space. Y'all are fucking ridiculous. The matter is one of degree, right? And that's the other thing. Who gets to make the determination? Where does a cutoff line become? Like, I hear the eat the rich argument all the time because I'm involved in political spaces, right? And people are like, eat the rich. All right, who defines rich? What is the point of rich? If you are making $30,000 a year, somebody making $100,000 a year is rich. But if you're making $100,000 a year, somebody making $150,000 a year may be rich, but probably not. Somebody making $200,000 a year, you probably would consider them rich. If you're making $200,000 a year, somebody making $1 million a year is rich. Who decides where the cutoff line is? Who decides when that gets stopped? Who gets to say you can come this far but no farther in your own personal gains? Who gets to say that? Who gets to decide that? The government? Victim mentality shit. The matter is one of degree and is easy to adjust since various legal formalities are necessary in large transactions but not in small ones. Where such formalities are indispensable, they give the state opportunity to exercise control. To take another instance, jewelry is not capital in the economic sense, since it is not a means of production, but as things are, a man who possesses diamonds can sell them and buy shares. The horror. Doing something with your own personal gains. I'm gonna rage. Under socialism, he may still possess diamonds, but he cannot sell them to buy shares, since there will be no shares to be bought. Well, damn, you just solved the whole free will issue. Just don't give them the choice. Private wealth need not be legally prohibited, but only private investment, which leads to private wealth. With the result, and see, this is the other thing, right? Private investment is, I go to 5 of my friends and say, hey, I want to start a business. Say it's a bakery or a restaurant. I want to start a restaurant. I'm going to be the manager, but I need the capital investment. So I go to 5 of my friends and I say, hey, if you give me $10,000, I'm going to start a restaurant and you will get a return on your investment. That is corporation, right? That is financing. That is interest bearing even. That is an investment. That is me and 5 of my friends deciding that we are going to invest in the same thing with no government needed. Nobody had to go to the government and say, hey, is it okay if this guy gives me a little bit of money? Right? That is not true in other places. In socialism, for instance, if I want to start a bakery or a restaurant, I've got to go to the government and I have to ask permission to start a bakery. And the government gets to decide, yeah, okay, we think that this will work, or no, we don't think this will work. In the private system, whether I succeed or fail is entirely up to me. I can go into an overly saturated market. I can go where there's a McDonald's and a Burger King and a Taco Bell and a Wendy's and all of this, and I can decide I'm going to actually cook, right? I'm going to get good ingredients and I'm going to prepare them well in a nice ambience. And then my success depends on how well I can meet the needs of the market. It is not dependent upon whether McDonald's is there. It is not dependent on whether Burger King is there. It's dependent on whether I am better than them. That is the separation. It's not class. It is harder, right? If they have all of this money, it's a little bit harder to get started. But you, through exceptionalism, can be better. That is what we have to preserve. The government gets to decide who's the winners and losers. That is for the birds. That is what we have suffered through for the last 4 years in this country, and I'm done with that. Private wealth need not be legally prohibited, but only private investment. You cannot invest in my restaurant. How dare you even suggest it? With the result that, since no one will be in receipt of interest, private wealth will gradually melt away, except as regards a reasonable modicum of personal possessions. Economic power over other human beings must not belong to individuals, but such private property as does not confer economic power may survive. So, you get to live in your house on rented land, but you don't get to own any land because that might give you a little bit of wealth. You get to make a wage to eat, right, and to pay your rent, but you don't get to save any of that to do with what you want, right? If you're saving money, you're getting paid too much. You need to redistribute that. If you have money in the bank in case an emergency comes up, you need to redistribute that. That is not for you. That is building economic wealth. You can't do that. You can't put that money where you want. Are you fucking kidding me? How dare you even think that you can invest your money where you think is the best? What the fuck is wrong with you? You see how silly it is? Do you see how silly it is? The advantages to be expected from the establishment of socialism, supposing this to be possible without a devastating revolutionary war, are many different kinds and are by no means confined to the wage-earning class. I am far from confident that all or any of these advantages would result from the victory of a socialist party in a long and difficult class conflict, which would exasperate tempers, bring to the fore a ruthless militaristic type, waste, by death or exile or imprisonment, the talents of many valuable experts, and give to the victorious government a barrack room type of mentality. The merits which I shall claim for socialism all presuppose that it will have been brought about by persuasion, and that such force as may be necessary will consist only of the defeat of small bands of malcontents. How dare you want to keep a hold of your wealth and your land? I don't care that it's been in your family for 5 generations. I don't care. That belongs to the state now. I am persuaded that if socialist propaganda were conducted with less hate and bitterness, appealing not to envy but to the obvious need of economic organization, the task of persuasion would be enormously facilitated, and the need for force correspondingly diminished. I deprecate the appeal to force, except in defense of what, through persuasion, has become legally established, because A, it is likely to fail, B, the struggle must be disastrously destructive, and C, the victors, after an obstinate fight, are likely to have forgotten their original objects, and to institute something quite different, probably a military tyranny. Yes. I presuppose, therefore, that As a condition for successful socialism, the peaceful persuasion of a majority to acceptance of its doctrines. I shall adduce 9 arguments in favor of socialism, none of them new, and not all of equal importance. The list would be indefinitely lengthened, but I think that these 9 should suffice to show that it is not a gospel for one class only. The breakdown of the profit motive. Profit, as a separate economic category, only becomes clear at a certain stage of industrial development. The germ of it, however, might be seen in the relations of Robinson Crusoe and his man Friday. Let us suppose that, in the autumn, Robinson Crusoe, by means of his gun, has acquired control of the whole food supply on his island. He is, then, in a position to cause Friday to work at the preparation of next year's harvest, on the understanding that Friday shall be kept alive, while all the surplus shall go to his employer. What Robinson Crusoe receives under this contract may be regarded as interest on his capital. His capital being his few tools, and the stored of food which he possesses. But profit, as it occurs in more civilized conditions, involves the further circumstance of exchange. A cotton manufacturer, for example, does not make cotton only for himself and his family. Cotton is not the only thing he needs, and he has to sell the bulk of his produce in order to satisfy his other requirements. But before he can manufacture cotton, he has to buy other things: raw cotton, machinery, labor, and power. His profit consists of the difference between what he pays for these things and what he receives for the finished product. But if he himself manages his factory, we must deduct whatever would have been the salary of a manager hired to do the same work. Wrong. So he doesn't get compensation. That is to say, the manufacturer's profit consists of his total earnings less the wages of the hypothetical manager. In large businesses, where the shareholders do no work of management, what they receive is the profit of the enterprise that they invested their private money in. They are taking entirely the whole of the risk. If the business fails, which most do, they lose their money. They lose the gains which they have wrought with their hard work. Your argument is invalid. Those who have money to invest are actuated by the expectation of profit, which is therefore the determining motive as to what new undertakings shall be started and what old ones should be expanded. It has been supposed by the defenders of our present system that the expectation of profit would lead, on the whole, to the right commodities being produced in the right quantities. Up to a point this has been true in the past, but it is true no longer. You are wrong. Right? The market, whenever there is a new product that comes to market, there is a period of adjustment, right? This brand new phone comes out, floods the market, and everybody's like, ooh, I gotta have the phone. So they run out to get the phone, and there's large demand, so they increase production, and then there is too much, right? So there is a calm down period where the adjustment between what the actual demand is and the actual supply is, that it adjusts, right? You have scarcity, and then you don't have scarcity, and you have a surplus, and then you don't have a surplus, and eventually the market equalizes. That happens in the free market. Not only does it happen and is provable everywhere, but the exact opposite happens in central control. The government anticipates something and they build it up, but nobody actually wants it, so they have a whole storehouse. Right? They didn't do the market research. They just assumed and ran with it. Your ability to invest your money into something that will make you a profit is the underpinnings of what we do. Right? Your free choice, being able to decide, I'm going to take my money and put it to work where I want it to, is what underpins our freedom. This is a result of the complicated character of modern production. If I am an old-fashioned village cobbler and the neighbors bring me their shoes to be mended, I know that the produce of my labor will be wanted. But if I am a large-scale manufacturer of shoes, employing expensive machinery, I have to guess how many pairs of shoes I shall be able to sell, and I may easily guess wrong. I just explained that. Another man may have better machinery and be able to sell shoes more cheaply. Or my former customers may have grown poorer and have learned to make old shoes last longer. Or the fashion may change and the people may demand a kind of shoe which my machines are unable to produce. If any of these things happen, not only do I cease to make a profit, but my machines stand idle and my employers are out of work. The labor that went into the making of my machines failed to result in the production of useful commodities and was completely wasted, as if it had consisted of throwing sand into the sea. The men who are thrown out of employment are no longer creating anything that serves human need, and the community is impoverished to the extent of whatever is spent on keeping them from starvation. See how this is so victim mentality, bro. Like, you have the capacity to change what you are doing, right? Even on a large scale like this. Yes, you're going to suffer a loss. You should be able to adjust to the market's needs. If not, then you are going to fail at capitalism, and nobody should save you from that, right? If you make a stupid investment, nobody should save you from that. Nobody should come in. There should be no government saying you're too big to fail. Shout out directly to the banks, right? Like, nobody should do that. You should either succeed or fail, and competition will come in. If you are this cobbler and you are making quality shoes, then you are going to do better than the industrial people making these mass-produced shoes for lesser quality. You will do that if you market yourself correctly, if you maintain the proper balance between your needs and the profit, right? If you maintain that and you do good, honest work, you'll stay in work. Right? We still have small grocery stores, even though we have Walmart, and Walmart is literally the devil. Like, Walmart literally is the embodiment of socialism. Like, for real, it is the government being Walmart in this situation as a central control agent, artificially deflating the value of things, including wages, keeping the economy stagnant in local areas. Whereas if you have competition, you may fail, true, but you may succeed. Just as true. It is up to you and your work ethic. The men, being dependent upon unemployment benefit instead of wages, spend much less than formerly, and therefore cause employment among those who make the goods which they formerly bought. Or you could readjust your factory and make shoes that people actually want to buy. And dependent entirely upon unemployment benefit. I'm going to tell you something. I started working when I was 13 years old, right? I started building houses at 13. I went and joined the Navy. I got out and I went to the plants. And the only time that I drew an unemployment benefit when I was physically capable of work was when I wanted to. I would ask for a reduction of force so I could draw unemployment and go fishing for a couple of weeks. That's the only time I drew that benefit. If the job ended, I went and found another job. I didn't wait around for the government to send me money. Now, I'm in a different situation now. If you don't know, I am on Social Security disability. I am working diligently to get myself off of that, but it is not there yet, right? I still have quite a bit of recovery left to do. But that is the safety net, right? I paid into the system for my entire adult life. From the time I was 18 until the time I became injured, I maxed out my benefits, right? By the time I was 35, I had paid in more than enough to draw maximum benefits. That is because I worked and I didn't wait on the government to just send me money. Unemployment is one of those safety nets. You lost your job unexpectedly, here is some money to help you while you find another job. It is not just so you get paid and can do. It is so you can find another job. The problem that we have is that people expect the job to just leap out at them. And so, the original miscalculation as to the number of shoes that I could sell at a profit produces, gradually, widening circles of unemployment with accompanying diminution of demand. As for me, I am tethered to my expensive machinery, which has probably absorbed all of my capital and credit. This makes it impossible for me to turn suddenly from shoes to a more prosperous industry. Now, this is all underpinned by you not doing your market research, right? If you were starting a business, you should definitely be doing your market research. In this point in time, I don't know how easy it was, but I know now it is ridiculously easy. We have small business incubators scattered throughout this state. I don't know about the other states, but throughout this state, you can go to southeastern Louisiana University right here just up the road in Hammond, Louisiana, and they have a whole research department where you can go and make requests to see if you have the market to support your business. If you gear up a massive production and you are doing the wrong product, you failed, right? That was you not making correct decisions. Or take a more speculative business, shipbuilding. During the war and for a little while afterwards, there was an immense demand for ships, as no one knew how long the war might last or how successful the U-boats might be. Enormously elaborate preparations were made for building unprecedented number of ships. By 1920, the war losses had been made good, and the need of ships, owing to the diminution of seaborne trade, had suddenly grown much less. Almost all the shipbuilding plan became useless, and the great majority of the men employed were thrown out of work. It cannot be said that they deserved this misfortune, since the governments had urged them frantically to build ships as fast as they could. But under our system of private enterprise, the governments had no recognized responsibility towards those who had been rendered destitute. And, inevitably, the destitution spread. There was less demand for steel, and therefore the iron and steel industry suffered. There was less demand for Australian and Argentine meat, because the unemployed had to be content with a spare diet. There was, as a result, less demand for the manufactures which Australia and the Argentine had taken in exchange for their meat, and so on indefinitely. And this is a logical fallacy, right? You are setting up the straw man here. Yes, the government made wrong predictions, right? They said, hey, we need as many ships as we can, instead of saying we need this amount of ships. Now, part of that is in response to losing a great deal of them to said U-boats, right? And so we needed to be able to replace it in order to stop socialism and fascism from becoming a thing. The war market, in my estimation, is not the best, right? I'm not happy with the wars that we fight. I'm really not. The forever wars in the Middle East are stupid. The territorial war between Russia and Ukraine right now, stupid. Israel and Hamas, that's a little bit more easily to explain because, one group wants the other group to be completely wiped off the map, and the other group just kind of wants to live in a spot where they're not under threat of being wiped off the map. But the government saying that we need this thing and then deciding it would be socialism. That's what that would be. That would be government control of the demand, the boats, and because the government changed their mind and they no longer want to buy the ships, that has caused the market to fail. It wasn't because the individual investor said, hey, I'm going to invest in these, right? The steel market, yeah, okay. It fell because we had less need for ships, but give it a couple of years. This was 1920. In a couple more years, they're going to pick right back up. The government failing to plan is not an excuse for socialism to be a good thing, right? The government failed to plan in how many ships they needed to build. And so obviously capitalism is wrong. Are you kidding me? That is stupid. He should have just stuck to math. There is one further point, very important reason for the failure of the profit motive in the present day, and that is the failure of scarcity. It often happens that goods of certain kinds can be produced in enormous quantities at cheaper rate than on a more modest scale. In that case, it may be that the most economical mode of production would be to have only one factory for each of these kinds of goods in the whole world. But then let's just eliminate competition altogether. But as this state of affairs has come about gradually, there are in fact many factories. Each knows that if it were alone in the world, it could supply everybody and make a large profit. That is another fallacy, right? That is severely underestimating exactly the enormity of the market, because there is not a single factory on the planet that can produce enough shoes for everybody on the planet. It would be a literal impossibility, right? You would have to employ so many people in the area that if there was a problem, everybody in the entire area would lose money. Like, this is a fallacy. This is setting up a straw man. I'm going to say that this is a great argument when it is not, right? That is the straw man fallacy. And so what is being done here is, again, a problem of misunderstanding the basic fundamentals of what you are talking about. The fact that there is competition allows for adjustment in the market. Like, that's literally a function of competition. But as it is, there are competitors. No one is working up to full capacity, and therefore no one is making a secure profit. And again, I would disagree heartily with that. There are plenty of places working to full capacity, right? Just because they are not the sole provider does not mean that they are not at capacity. We have a lot of plants here in Louisiana. I live just outside of Baton Rouge. You can name pretty much any type of industry, and I mean industry, not retail, and we have it. We have petrochemicals, we have non-petrochemical production, we have manufacturers of steel and anything you can really think of. We have that, and most of them are operating at market saturation, right? Whether it is them and their competitors, which is mostly the case, or there are some exclusive markets, but all of them are being met, right? And there is still more demand. There is demand outside of our particular country for most of the things that we make. There is still demand within the country, but there's not enough talent to work the machines, right? You have a limited number of people who are capable of doing the job. Of those who are capable of doing the job, some just don't want it. Some have their own thing going on. They are going to be entrepreneurs for themselves. But some people are going to want to run your machines. But not everybody can do so. Some people can only sweep the floors. That is a real thing. Running at capacity is market saturation in many different levels, right? It is the market buying your things, but it is also the ability to supply those things. And unless you are going to go and move people to your factory, you will hit an employment wall. There will be a point where you cannot get more people to work. That will be your market saturation for that. There will be many different levels of that, right? It's across, like, it's so broad that we cannot even hit all of the specifics, but you will hit a point where you cannot expand past that, whether it be limitations in landscape or climate or regulation or education levels. Like, there is a saturation level for everything. And so to assume that one factory would be able to produce all the needed goods for the entire world is, again, stupid. This leads to economic imperialism, since the only possibility of profit lies in the exclusive control of some huge market. Meanwhile, the weaker competitors go under, and the larger the units, the greater the dislocation when one of them closes down. Competition leads to so much being produced that it cannot be sold at a profit. But the reduction in the supply is unduly slow, since where there is much expensive machinery, it may be less disastrous to produce for a term of years at a loss than not to produce at all. And see, one of the functions of competition is to make sure that the market gets completely saturated to the point where there is a rebound, right? There will be a point where you cannot sell more widgets than you make, or as many widgets as you make. Competition helps keep that in check. If you are directly competing with somebody, you are going to check the market more often, right? You're going to see, are we getting near to saturation levels? And if you are near to saturation levels, you will make the adjustment so that you do not oversaturate the market. Literally a function of competition. All these confusions and dislocations result from leaving modern large-scale industry to be directed by the motive of private profit. In a capitalistic regime, the cost which determines whether a certain product shall be manufactured by a certain firm is the cost to that firm, not to the community. Let us illustrate the difference by an imaginary example. Suppose someone, say Mr. Henry Ford, finds out a way of making motor cars so cheaply that no one else can compete, with the result that all the other firms engaged in making cars go bankrupt. In order to arrive at the cost to the community of one of the new cheap cars, one must add to what Mr. Ford would have to pay the proper proportion of all the now useless plants belonging to other firms. What? And the cost of rearing and educating those workers and managers previously unemployed by other firms, but now out of work. Well, I got some news for you. Mr. Ford, he did indeed find a way to make cheaper cars. And you know what happened? Competition. We got Chevy, we got Dodge, we got Pontiac, we got Mercedes and BMW even. We have a market so wide ass open that we still to this day cannot meet all of the requirements. Isn't that amazing what competition can do? Isn't it amazing? Yeah, some people lost their ass. People who were out there, the Duesenbergs, right? They're out there handcrafting cars. And instead of adjusting their pricing so that it reflects that it is as a handcrafted as opposed to mass-produced car, they didn't compete, right? However, Mercedes and those, they did. They decided to become the level of car above the mass-produced. But they still use mass-produced techniques. What Ford did was make it better for everyone. It was a lot easier to get something cheaper. And the competition adjusted to that through time. That is, again, a function of capitalism, right? We see a spot in the market and someone else is filling that spot and we're like, well, you know what? I can probably do it a little cheaper than that. And then we get innovation. And because of that, we got the system of building cars that has been implemented in other places, right? The factory mechanization has been implemented in other places to great benefit. Now, there are some parts of that I don't like, right? I don't necessarily care for the mass production of farm goods in the way that we do. These monoculture farms that are just completely destroying the environment. I don't particularly care for that. The genetically modified so that it resists a little bit better. I don't really care for that either. It's causing all kinds of health issues. But once again, the market will adjust for that. Now that we understand that genetically modified corn is causing digestive issues and heart problems in so many people, we can make adjustments away from that. That, again, is a function of competition. Some will obtain employment with Mr. Ford, but probably not all, since the new process is cheaper and therefore requires less labor, or it requires less labor and is therefore cheaper. See how you can spin it? There may well also be other expenses to the community. Labor disputes, strikes, riots, extra police, trials and imprisonments. Yeah, those are all endemic. When all of these items are taken into account, it may well be found that the cost of the new cars to the community is, at first, considerably greater than that of the old ones. Now it is the cost to the community which determines what is socially advantageous, while it is the cost to the individual manufacturer which determines, in our system, what takes place. How socialism would deal with this problem I shall explain at a later stage. 2. The possibility of leisure. There's a footnote. I shall treat this topic briefly since it is discussed in the first essay of this volume, which we have already talked about extensively. Again, fall back to this playlist. Owing to the productivity of machines, much less work than was formerly necessary is now needed to maintain a tolerable standard of comfort in the human race. Some careful writers maintain that 1 hour's work a day would suffice, but perhaps this estimate does not take sufficient account of Asia. I shall assume, in order to be quite sure of being on the safe side, that 4 hours work a day on the part of all adults would suffice to produce as much material comfort as reasonable people ought to desire. At present, however, owing to the operation of the profit motive, leisure cannot be distributed evenly. Some are overworked, while others are wholly unemployed. The result as follows. The value of the wage earner to the employer depends upon the amount of work he does. Yes, which, so long as the hours do not exceed 7 or 8, is supposed by the employer to be proportional to the length of the working day. The wage earner, on the other hand, prefers a rather long day at good wages to a very short one at much lower wages. Yes, hence it suits both parties to have a long working day, leaving those who, in consequence, are unemployed to starve or to be cared for by the public authorities at the public expense. Or they could start a fucking job, right? Like, the lack of motivation is most of what our problem is in this particular area. Right? You see vast tracts of land that are owned by people that could be productive, but they don't. By that I mean that there is fruits and nuts that are being produced by these trees and they don't harvest them. There is timber and trees and they don't harvest that. But they will sit around and wait for a check to come in from the state. That is a problem. And again, that is a problem endemic to socialism, right? That is not a problem that is because of capitalism. Capitalism says, you know what? I don't have a factory within 100 miles of me, but I've got a whole bunch of pecan trees, and if I go out there and I pick the pecans, I can sell them pecans for a profit for myself, and then I can change my circumstance. Or I can cut firewood, and if you don't need firewood here, I can transport the firewood to where it is needed, and I can sell that firewood for a profit in which I can improve myself. Socialism is the government saying, hey, you've got some trees, cut them down. Capitalism is me saying, hey, I've got some trees, let me manage this responsibly. Again, this comes down to most people are not educated in the way that would make them responsible entrepreneurs. The American dream is the ability to go out and chase what you want to do, right? It is not everybody having a house and a car. It is you deciding that I want a house and so I can get it. It is me saying I don't like this particular situation, so I'm going to move, right? That is the American dream, the free ability to choose your own course and your own destination. And that is taken away in these systems. It's the problem is not that you don't have leisure time. That is the main takeaway from this. Just as it was when we began this study. If you are not doing the things which will bring you value in your life right now, it doesn't matter if you have more leisure time, you are not going to do it then either. What you're going to do is if you have more leisure time, you're going to sit in front of Netflix. You're going to sit in front of Hulu. You're going to spend time playing an MMO. You're going to spend your time in the manner that you want to. Right? And some people have the drive to become more. Some people have the drive to ensure that their path is going to be better, and so they seek to better themselves. And some people don't. Some people are perfectly content going to work for 8 hours, bitching about their job, and then coming home and sitting on their ass for another 12 hours. Since the majority of the human race do not, at present, reach a reasonable level of material comfort, an average of An average of less than 4 hours work a day, wisely directed, would suffice to produce what is now produced in the way of necessaries and simple comforts. And see, this is not true now. It may have been true then, but it is not true now. Now, human race is an awfully big term. You have many places that don't even desire to be on the industrial level where we are. Many places in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, in South America, for instance, they are perfectly content living the life that they have been living for 10,000 years. But in places where we have decided that we want these comforts, we have them, right? Here in the United States, we have fat, homeless people. Most of the homeless people are homeless by choice. I know that's going to set somebody off, but it is true. There are people who are homeless by circumstance, and there are people who are homeless because they choose to be. Assistance is there. Aid is there. They can be retrained in most places, but they don't because they are happy where they are. They would rather complain about it than to change it. That is the problem that we have. It is not that you have an 8-hour workday. It is that if you had a 4 hours workday, you would just get an extra 4 hours of sitting on your ass. Most of the levels of material comfort are met here in the United States. Again, there are instances where it is not. But for the most part, if you desire to live in a house, you can do so. Even if it is just renting, you can get that level of material comfort, which is shelter and possessions. You can do that. If you are not doing that, you are choosing not to do that. There are less people living in poverty now because of the United States than have ever been in history. That means that if the average working day for those who have to work is 8 hours, more than half of the workers would be unemployed if it were not for certain forms of inefficiency and unnecessary production. To take first, inefficiency, we have already seen some of the waste involved in competition. But we must add to this all that is spent in advertising and all the very skilled work that goes into marketing. Nationalism involves another kind of waste. American automobile manufacturers, for example, find it necessary, owing to tariffs, to establish works in the principal European countries, whereas it would obviously save labor if they could produce all of their cars in one huge establishment in the United States. Then there is the waste involved in armaments and in military training, which involves the whole male population wherever there is compulsory military service. Thanks to these and other forms of extravagance, together with the luxuries of the rich, more than half of the population is still employed. But so long as our present system lasts, every step towards the elimination of waste can only make the plight of wage earners even worse than it is now, and that is proven untrue. Right? It may have been true when he was speculating about these things, but it has been proven untrue. Like the fact that we live in such material extravagance everywhere. We have fat, homeless people. Like back in the day, if you were homeless, it meant you were probably going to starve. We do not have that problem. We have fat, homeless people with smartphones. Economic insecurity, number 3. In the present state of the world, not only are many people destitute, but the majority of those who are not are haunted by a perfectly reasonable fear that they may become so at any moment. Wage earners have the constant danger of unemployment. Salaried employees know that their firm may go bankrupt or find it necessary to cut down its staff. Businessmen, even those who are reputed to be very rich, know that the loss of all their money is by no means improbable. Professional men have a very hard struggle. After making great sacrifices for the education of their sons and daughters, they find that there are not the openings that there used to be for those who have the kinds of skills that their children have acquired. If they are lawyers, they find that people can no longer afford to go to law, although serious injustices remain unremedied. If they are doctors, they find that their formerly lucrative hypochondriac patients can no longer afford to be ill, while many genuine sufferers have to forego much-needed medical treatment. One finds men and women of university education serving behind the counters in shops, which may save them from destitution, but only at the expense of those who would formerly have been so employed. And again, this comes down to personal responsibility. Okay. Market saturation is a thing. Market changes are a thing. Leading up to Henry Ford's revitalization of the automobile industry, because prior to that it was an extremely niche thing, right? Most people could not afford to buy a car. One of the things that people were employed in New York City, for instance, was picking up horse shit. It was such a problem that they had to go hourly and scoop shit because there was so many horses. And one of the main arguments against automobiles was that the people who were scooping shit would no longer have a job. What happened instead was that they had to pivot into a different job. Farriers were no longer as important as they were as well. Like, you had spent your entire life being a blacksmith, learning how to make horseshoes and to apply them to horses. And now that was a much less needed job. The adjustment had to be made. But that adjustment would have had to have been made whether the government was in control or not. Those jobs would have gone away whether the government was involved or not. It wasn't. The government had no part in that. The market did its own thing. That is true with every job. Doesn't matter what position you're in. If you, as a doctor, are relying upon a hypochondriac patient, you are doing your job wrong. It is your job to let them know that they are being hypochondriacs. Right? We have our safety nets here that allow people who need medical treatment to receive that, despite the fact that they may not be able to pay them bills. These are real things that we have adjusted for in the free market. And so, once again, your arguments are invalid. This comes back to personal responsibility, and that you need to figure out what you are going to do. We have this same problem in one specific instance. We have convinced our children that they have to have a college degree in order to be successful in life, and that is a patent lie. As a matter of fact, it is almost detrimental these days to go and put yourself into debt. Back in the day when Russell was writing, if you wanted to go to school, you had to have a genuine interest in what you were learning. You had to understand that there was a market for your skills when you left, but that we don't have that problem anymore. Due to the government, not the free market. The government has regulated that these universities must implement coursework that is not productive, right? Women's studies, right? Gender studies. There is nothing productive that you are going to be able to do on the backside of that, right? It's just not going to happen. Business management, however, is a good one. If you go to school for business management, you're probably going to get a job using those skills. If you go to school for gender studies, you're probably not. Knowing your market before you make the investment in yourself, which is what going to school is, if you're paying for it or not, it is still an investment in yourself, an investment of time, if nothing else, and an investment of intellectual capital into yourself, if not physical capital, because people have scholarships and we give free education away a lot. But if you're going for a degree in something that is not useful, you are going to wind up working counters in shops. You made a poor choice. It doesn't matter if the government is involved in that or not. As a matter of fact, they will probably prevent you from going to school in a socialist. Like we have it now where there's a profit motive for creating all of these things, so the government has said that you need to. But that inefficiency is not because of the market as much as for the government regulations. Us deciding that as a government we were going to subsidize people going to school has increased the cost of school and lessened the efficiency of going to school. In all classes, from the lowest to almost the highest, economic fear governs men's thoughts by day and their dreams at night, making their work nerve-wracking and their leisure unrefreshing. This ever-present terror is, I think, the main cause of the mood of madness which was swept over great parts of the civilized world. The desire for wealth is, in most cases, due to a desire for security. Yes. Yes. Men save money and invest it in hope of having something to live on when they become old and infirm. Yes. And of being able to prevent their children from sinking in the social scale. Yes. In former days, this hope was rational since there were such things as sale investments. But now, security has become unattainable. The largest businesses fail, states go bankrupt, and whatever still stands is liable to be swept away in the next war. The result, except for those who continue to live in a fool's paradise, is a mood of unhappy recklessness, which makes a sane consideration of possible remedies very difficult. And again, you are arguing wrong, right? Men save money in hopes of having something to live on, yes. But you are not proposing anything that will change that. People are still going to get old. They still need to save for when they get old. The government is woefully unprepared for taking care of people. If you don't believe that, look at our social nets, right? I started working at 13 years old. I've already discussed that. I capped out at 35 the maximum benefits that I could receive by paying into the system. It is not impressive amount of money, right? It is not. It is barely enough to help with another full-time employer. If you happen to be someone who is above the age of retirement, which is 65, I think, currently in the United States, and you are relying upon Social Security retirement, you're probably not going to get your needs met. Not at all. Right? You are going to be struggling. You will have to find outside resources to help you pay your bills and buy your food. I know this because I know people on the Social Security who did not prepare for themselves in any way. They were merely looking at Social Security as the net. Well, the net's there, but it is not a good net. It's got really big holes and people fall through it all the fucking time. It is because the government is inefficient in everything that it does. That is part of, that's built into the system in large part. The inefficiency is part of the system working correctly. And so we shouldn't be expecting the government to come in and save us, right? We should be expecting that the fruits of our own efforts will bear out. Economic security would do more to increase the happiness of civilized communities than any other change that can be imagined, except the prevention of war. Work, to the extent that may be socially necessary, should be legally obligatory for all healthy adults, but their income should depend only upon their willingness to work, and should not cease when, for some reason, their services are temporarily unnecessary. So what, the company should continue paying them even though there is no demand for the product? A medical man, for example, should receive a certain salary, ceasing only with his death, though he would not be expected to work after a certain age. And who makes those determinations? Who decides, okay, this is the salary that you're going to make? The government? They're so wonderful at that. Who decides what the age is? Now, we have decided that 65 is the age. What if you work hard and you decide to retire at 45? And you are able to provide for yourself, right? Again, this is not arguing soundly, right? He should be sure of a good education for his children. If the health of the community improved so much that there was no longer need of the direct medical services of all qualified practitioners, some of them should be employed in medical research or in investigating measures of sanitation or the promotion of a more adequate diet. We have all of that underneath the capitalist system. I do not think that it can be doubted that the great majority of medical men would be happier under such a system than they are at present, even if it involved a diminution in the rewards of the few who achieve eminent success. The desire for exceptional wealth is by no means a necessary stimulus to work. At present, most men work not in order to be rich, but in order to avoid starvation. A postman does not expect to become richer than other postmen, nor does a soldier or sailor hope to amass a fortune by serving his country. There are a few men, it is true, and they tend to be men of exceptional energy and importance, to whom the achievement of a great financial success is a dominant motive. Some do good, others do harm. Some make or adopt a useful invention, others manipulate the stock exchange or corrupt politicians. But in the main, what they want is success, of which money is the symbol. If success were only obtainable in other forms, such as honors or important administrative posts, they would still have an adequate incentive and might find it more necessary than they do now to work in ways advantageous to the community. Wow, the idealism of this fucking idiot. The desire for wealth in itself, as opposed to the desire for success, is not a socially useful motive, any more than the desire for excess in eating or drinking. A social system is therefore none the worse for leaving no outlet to this desire. On the other hand, a system which abolished insecurity would do away with most of the hysteria of modern life. Did you know that once upon a time, I believe it was Stalin, but it might have been Lenin, attempted to abolish money, attempted to get rid of it, and it did not work out so well. You should look that up if you're interested in seeing what would happen if you got rid of money, right? People have a very, very wrong understanding of what money is. Money is an exchange of time. It is a method by which we can say this value roughly equates this value, right? My hour of work is roughly equal to this amount of money, which is redeemable for this amount of goods, right? So instead of having to go and work for a restaurant in order to eat, I can give them money and it is the same thing. It doesn't matter what you use for that currency. It can be dollars, it can be gold, it can be monopoly money, right? If everybody has decided that this is the rate of exchange and this is the currency we are using, then that is the function of the currency. It doesn't change, right, if you go from the petrodollar back to the gold system. Money is still the same. The basis of the currency, which is used for the money, is different, but the effect is the same. It is a storing of my time into something that I can carry in my pockets for someone else to take in exchange for goods and services. 4. The unemployed rich. The evils of unemployment among wage earners are generally recognized. The suffering to themselves, the loss of their labor to the community, and the demoralizing effect of prolonged failure to find work are such familiar themes that it is unnecessary to enlarge upon them. The unemployed rich are an evil of a different sort. The world is full of idle people, mostly women, who have little education, much money, and consequently great self-confidence. Owing to their wealth, they are able to cause much labor to be devoted to their comfort. Although they seldom have any genuine culture, they are chief patrons of art, which is not likely to please them unless it is bad. This is all opinion, right? Are there idle people? Yes. Most of them are probably wealthy. Yes. But they spend their money, and spending their money sends it on down the line. But this is opinion, right? It's mostly women. Consequently, great self-confidence. Owing to their wealth, they are able to cause much labor to be devoted to their comfort, right? Although they seldom have any genuine culture, opinion, they are the chief patrons of art, which is not likely to please them unless it is bad. Who gets to decide what is bad art? Do you get to decide what's bad art? I have my opinions. They may not be the same as yours. Who gets to decide that? Opinions. Their uselessness drives them into an unreal sentimentality, which causes them to dislike vigorous sincerity and to exercise a deplorable influence upon culture. Now, I am not totally opposed to this opinion. Look at the Kardashians, that's what their name is. They're all pretty much useless. I understand that one's got a clothing line, but they're reality stars, right? They got famous because one of them had a sex tape release, and that led to their fame. One of them called themselves a different type of human, from male to female, without actually following through with things because they were under a sexual assault charge, and so they decided to randomize their existence. Those are pretty useless people to me. They really are. But we have rich people who definitely invest themselves into the betterment of our country. Elon Musk, for example, right? He came here, immigrated to the United States, became a U.S. citizen, and is investing his personal money into betterment of our country. Right? You can make the argument on either side, for either way, right? There are plenty of people that I don't find to be productive who have money by being productive, right? Bill Gates, he may have made his money by stealing from his partner to begin with. Zuckerberg, same thing. But they use their money for things. Who are you to say that they don't deserve to have the money that they have? Who are you to decide what the cutoff line for richness is? Right? The same argument we made before. You don't get to decide that this is too much for someone else to have. That's victim mentality shit. Get out there and compete. Especially in America, where the men who make money are mostly too busy to spend it themselves. Culture is largely dominated by women whose sole claim to respect is that their husbands possess the art of growing rich. Jealousy. Such a horrible, horrible thing to foment in yourself. There are those who maintain that capitalism is more favorable to art than socialism would be. But I think they are remembering the aristocracies of the past and forgetting the plutocracies of the present. No, we have the proof. Communism and socialism do not breed art, right? There are some expressions of art that are allowed, but for the most part it is not. Right? If you are not towing the party line, you don't get to make sculptures, you don't get to make paintings, you don't get to write books. God forbid you try to write a book with an independent thought outside of the scope of the state. No, that is immediate death. The existence of the idle rich has other unfortunate results. Although in the more important industries, the modern tendency is towards few large enterprises rather than many small ones. There are still many exceptions to this rule. Consider, for example, the number of unnecessary small shops in London. Throughout the parts where rich women do their shopping, there are innumerable hat shops, usually kept by Russian countesses, each professing to be a little more exquisite than any of the others. Their customers drift from one to the next, spending hours on a purchase which ought to be a matter of minutes. The labor of those who serve in the shops and the time of those who buy in them is alike wasted. Who are you to decide that they wasted their time in making a decision about what they are going to wear? Right? The labor, did they get paid? Yes, they did. And so, not a waste of time. And there is the further evil that the livelihood of a number of people becomes bound up with futility. The spending power of the very rich causes them to have large numbers of parasites who, however far removed from wealth they may be themselves, nevertheless fear that they would be ruined if there were no idle rich to buy their wares. All these people suffer morally, intellectually, and artistically from their dependence upon the indefensible power of foolish people. And again, this is all opinion, right? Most of which has been proven untrue. 5. Education. Higher education, at present, is mainly, though not entirely, confined to the children of the well-to-do. It sometimes happens, it is true, that working class boys or girls reach the university by means of scholarships. But, as a rule, they have had to work so hard in the process that they are worn out and do not fulfill their early promise. Again, victim mentality, right? It was so hard to apply for the scholarships that now you can be intellectually invested in actually learning anything while you're at the actual Institute of Learning. Wow. The result of our system is that there is a great waste of ability. A boy or girl born of wage-earning parents may be of first-rate capacity in mathematics or music or science, but it is very unlikely that he or she will have a chance to exercise this talent. Moreover, education, at least in England, is still infected through and through with snobbery. In private and elementary schools, consciousness of class is imbibed by the pupils at every moment of their school life. And, since education is, in the main, controlled by the state, it has to defend the status quo, and, therefore, must, as far as possible, blunt the critical faculties of young people and preserve them from dangerous thoughts. All this, it must be admitted, is inevitable in any insecure regime, and is worse in Russia than in England or America. But while a socialist regime might, in time, become sufficiently secure to not be afraid of criticism, it is now hardly possible that this should happen to a capitalistic regime, unless by the establishment of a slave state, in which the workers receive no education at all. It is not to be expected, therefore, that the present defects in the educational system can be remedied until the economic system has been transformed. I am not a proponent of the Department of Education in the United States of America. That is because, largely, due to the culture that we have here, not everybody learns in the same way. And the problem with the Department of Education is that they want to standardize learning for everyone. There are at least 32 different learning styles, at least. And that is simply going off of my work in the MBTI stuff. Some people are focused on things, some people are focused on ideas. Some people want new, some people want old. Some people do it for the tribe, some people do it for themselves. All of these play intricately into how you learn. We have a system set up for one specific type of learning. That is governmental control of learning, and that is a problem. However, we have homeschool availability, and it is entirely provable that on the general level, right, mainly, people who are homeschooled are better educated than people who go to public school. There are exceptions to that. Some people who go to extremely religious schools, right, they don't learn real facts. They think the earth is flat or that there's a firmament and things like that. And people who go to other schools learn things that are equally not smart. But that is true in the educational system in general. Our problem is that we do not place the proper emphasis upon learning, and we try to generalize it. If we can come to the understanding that people learn in different ways and to tailor the different teaching styles to the different individuals, we would have better results. The standardization has taken away our desire to learn things, right? If you have a genuine desire to learn something, nothing is going to stop you from it. But if you don't have the desire to learn it, nothing is going to make you do it. That is the problem with our education system, is the fact that people do not value education. They value the degree, they value the end product of education, but they don't want to do the work to actually get there. They don't want to sit down and learn the variables and learn the equations and learn the histories and learn the science. They want that to be free and quick and done. They don't want to learn the underlying reasonings, right? That is evident. And so The state control of our education system has not worked. Despite that, we have better education now than we did then. Despite the fact that we do not have a entirely capitalistic society, nor do we have an entirely fascistic society, which is, the United States is closer to fascism than it is to either communism or socialism. Right, we discussed that already. And so, trying to make everybody fit the same mold and not valuing the education is what our problem is. 6. The emancipation of women and the welfare of young children. In spite of all that has been done in recent times to improve the status of women, the great majority of wives are still financially dependent upon their husbands. Well, we fixed to blow this one up. This dependence is in various ways worse than that of a wage earner upon his employer. An employee can throw up his job, but for a wife, this is difficult. Moreover, however hard she has to work and keep in the house, she cannot claim money wages. So long as this state of affairs persists, it cannot be said that wives have anything approaching economic equality with men. Yet, it is difficult to see how the matter can be remedied without the establishment of socialism. Well, guess what? We did that, and it did not work out so well. It is necessary that the expense of children should be borne by the state rather than by the husband, and that married women, except during lactation and the latter part of pregnancy, should earn their living by working outside the home. This will require certain architectural reforms, considered in an earlier essay in this volume, and the establishment of nursery schools for the very young children. All right, we dealt with that in the earlier essay, but we have, in fact, put women to work. I don't know if you're aware of this, but that happens every single day. And what has happened as a result of that is a small level of economic growth, but now pretty much every home is dependent upon two parties working in the home or working outside of the home, which has led to the degradation of society in many, many ways. Should women be financially subservient to their husbands? No, right? It should be a partnership. I am in the position where things are reversed, right? I became injured. My wife works full-time outside of the home. I have Social Security, so I have a stipend. But if it wasn't for her being able to work, we would have been in dire straits. Part of the reason why it is possible for us to exist is because I took care of the kids, right? If the daycare would have been a thing, it wouldn't have been possible. But the economic freedom that is implied by having two people work just increased the cost of living. Now, everybody has to work two jobs. Everybody has to have this dual sense of income to maintain the status quo. Whereas, if we would have maintained the position that was, and not to say that it is necessarily correct, although it is probably a little more correct than now, the demand for labor would have increased because of the lack of ability to fulfill that. But by doubling the supply of the labor market, you are artificially stagnating the wages of those who earn them. If there was less competition for the employment, the wages in the employment would be higher, resulting in less profit margin for the owners of the business, but maintaining the level of comfort at a level where people could actually enjoy it instead of somebody working all of the time. As far as the architectural changes, we talked about that extensively, and we will be getting back to that when we do Fourier, because we are going to do Fourier. He advocated for that quite hard, and it was foolish. For the children, as for their mothers, this will be a great boon, since children require conditions of space and light. and diet, which are impossible in a wage earner's home. That's not true, and can be provided cheaply in a nursery school. This is the idea that the state can take better control of your kids than you can, and I vehemently disagree with that. A reform of this sort in the position of wives and the rearing of young children may be possible without complete socialism, and has even been carried out here and there on a small scale and incompletely. But it cannot be carried out adequately and completely except as a part of a general economic transformation of society. 7. Of the improvements to be expected in architecture from the introduction of socialism, I have already spoken. Painting, in former days, accompanied and adorned spacious architecture, and may do so again when the squalid privacy engendered by our competitive fear of our neighbors has given place to a desire for communal beauty. The modern art of the cinema has immense possibilities which cannot develop while the motive of producers is commercial. The market would definitely bear you wrong in that. In fact, many are of opinion that the USSR has come nearest to realizing these possibilities. Really? How literature suffers from the commercial motive every writer knows. Almost all vigorous writing offends some group and therefore makes sales less. So just get rid of vigorous writing. It is difficult for writers not to measure their own merit by their royalties, and when bad work brings great pecuniary rewards, it requires unusual firmness of character to produce good work and remain poor. It must be admitted that socialism might make matters even worse. Since publishing will be a state monopoly, it will be easy for the state to exercise an illiberal censorship. See the USSR, Mr. Russell. So long as there is violent opposition to the new regime, this will be almost unavoidable. But when the transition period is past, it may be hoped that books, which the state is not willing to accept on their merits, may be published if the author thinks it's worth his while to defray the expense by working overtime. Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? Are you kidding me? You have just argued against the ability to invest in yourself all the way through this, and now you're going to make the argument that, well, maybe we can supersede the government by investing our own money. Bruh. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I'm dumbfounded by this. Are you kidding me? For real? This is your argument. The whole way through this, it was, well, if you invest in your corporation, it's a bad thing because, the market won't bear it. But now, because the government has decided that the market won't bear it, you can supersede that by investing your profits. Okay. Kidding me, man. That's wild. Since the hours will be short, this will be no excessive hardship, but it will suffice to deter authors who are not seriously convinced that their books contain something of value. This is the case for capitalism. This is not the case for socialism. This is the case for capitalism. Are you kidding me? This is so funny to me. This is hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. It is important that it should be possible to get a book published, but not that it should be very easy. Books at present exceed in quantity as much as they fall short in quality. Boy, if he'd have been alive during Amazon. 8. Unprofitable public services. Ever since civilized government began, it has been recognized that there are some things which should be done, but cannot be left to the haphazard operation of the profit motive. The most important of these has been war. Even those who are most persuaded to the inefficiency of state enterprise do not suggest that national defense should be farmed out to private contractors. But there are many other things that the public authorities have found it necessary to undertake, such as roads, harbors, lighthouses, parks in cities, and so on. A very large department of socialized activity, which has grown up during the last 100 years, is public health. At first, the fanatical adherents of laissez-faire objected, but the practical arguments were overwhelming. If the theory of private enterprise had been adhered to, all sorts of new ways of making fortunes would have become possible. A man suffering from a plague might have gone to a publicity agent who would have sent out circulars to railway companies, theaters, etc., saying that the man contemplated dying on their premises unless a large sum were paid to his window. What? If the theory of private enterprise had been adhered to, all sorts of new ways of making fortunes would have become possible. A man suffering from plague might have gone to a publicity agent who would have sent out circulars to railway companies, theaters, saying that the man contemplated dying on their premises unless a large sum was paid to his widow. But it was decided that quarantine and isolation should not be left to voluntary effort, since the benefit was general and the loss individual. Well, we have had an extreme case of learning over the last 5 years. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much I can say, even today, that contradicts anything that we were told in 2020. But it is very important to note today, the 21st of January, 2025, that the number one agent who was cause for the shutdowns, the covering of faces, and the inoculation procedure, the quarantine, has been preemptively pardoned for any crimes that he might have committed. That is the government interference in that particular system showing through in the way that it will show through. If there is a severe threat to health and bodily security, people will voluntarily isolate themselves. That is what the actual function of it would be. If people were actually dying in actual numbers that were hinted at but never quite realized, people wouldn't naturally voluntarily isolate themselves in order to maintain that. This argument is wild. Like, this man makes some very wild arguments. Most of them are fallacies, right? This is, again, another straw man. On the supposition that somebody would say, I'm going to come and die in your company. Well, let's look at our litigious society. What happens now, right? People go to the store and they slip and fall and they sue, right? You get in a car accident and you sue. That is the same concept as this. It still happens. It would probably still happen in a socialist society. This idea is just wild to me, right? It was decided that quarantine and isolation would be better for the companies. And so you are arguing that. Mr. I don't like companies. The increasing number and complexity of the public services has been one of the characteristic features of the past century. The most enormous of these is education. Before this was enforced universally by the state, there were various motives for such schools and universities as existed. There were pious foundations dating from the Middle Ages and secular foundations, such as the Collège de France, established by enlightened Renaissance monarchs. And there were charity schools for the favored poor. None of these were run for profit. There were, however, schools run for profit. Of these, Du Bois Hall and Salem House were samples. There still are schools run for profit, and though the existence of education authorities prevents them from copying the model of the Do the Boys Hall, they are apt to rely upon their gentility rather than upon a high standard of scholastic attainment. On the whole, the profit motive has had little influence on education, and that little bad. And once again, I am going to bring you back to reality. We have charter schools. Most of the charter schools have better results than the public schools. They have the retaining of knowledge in a degree that we do not see in the public schools. They graduate their students at higher rates. They become gainfully employed in higher positions more often than the public school does. These are incontrovertible facts. You can pull up the stats. I'm not going to bother with it, but you can definitely pull up the stats. And charter schools have better results. That is the profit motive working. On the other hand, if you look at the universities and you see the subsidies that are being paid to the universities, right, that has resulted, state control, the subsidies, has resulted in lower educational value. People graduating with those gender studies degrees. Even when the public authorities do not actually carry out the work, they find it necessary to control it. Street lighting may be done by a private company, but it must be done whether profitable or not. Houses may be built by private enterprise, but the building is controlled by bylaws. In this case, it is now generally recognized that a much stricter regulation would be desirable. Unitary town planning, such as Sir Christopher Wren projected for London after the Great Fire, might do away with the hideousness and squalor of slums and suburbs and make modern cities beautiful, healthy, and pleasant. We may have a chance to find out about that very soon. If you are unaware, a large section of Southern California has just burnt away, and they are already talking about this. This example illustrates another of the arguments against private enterprise in our highly mobile world. The areas to be considered as units are too large to be dealt with by even the greatest plutocrats. London, for example, must be considered as a whole, since a large percentage of its inhabitants sleep in one part and work in another. Some important questions, such as the St. Lawrence Waterway, involve vast interests spread over different parts of two countries. In such cases, even a single government does not cover a sufficient area. Persons, goods, and power can all be transported much more easily than in former days, and with the result that small localities have less self-sufficiency than they had when the horse was the quickest mode of locomotion. Power stations are acquiring such importance that, if they are left in private hands, a new kind of tyranny becomes possible, comparable to that of the medieval baron in his castle. We have already discussed how governmental control of the power stations, right, the power companies, puts us much closer to fascism than the free market. It is obvious that a community which depends upon a power station cannot have tolerable economic security if the power station is free to exploit its monopolistic advantages to the full. That is why competition is good. The mobility of goods still causes dependence upon the railway. That of persons has partially returned to dependence upon the road. Railways and motor cars have made the separation of townships obsolete, and aeroplanes are having the same effect on national frontiers. In these ways, larger and larger areas involving more and more public control are rendered increasingly necessary by the progress of invention. 9. War. I come now to the last and strongest argument for socialism. I hope so, because all the arguments so far have been really weak. Namely, the need for preventing war. I shall not waste time on the likelihood of war or on its harmfulness, since these may be taken for granted. I shall confine myself to two questions. 1. how far is the danger of war at the present time bound up with capitalism? And 2. How far would the establishment of socialism remove the danger? War is an ancient institution, not brought into being originally by capitalism, although its causes were always mainly economic. It had, in the past, two main sources: the personal ambitions of monarchs and the expansive adventurousness of vigorous tribes or nations. Such a conflict as the 7 Years' War exhibit both features. In Europe, it was dynastic, whereas in America and India, it was a conflict of nations. The conquest of the Romans were largely due to the direct personal pecuniary motives on the part of the generals and their legionnaires. Pastoral peoples, such as the Arabs, the Huns, and the Mongols, have been repeatedly started upon a career of conquest by the insufficiency of their former grazing grounds. And at all times, except when a monarch would enforce his will, as in the Chinese and later Roman empires, war has been facilitated by the fact that vigorous males, confident of victory, enjoyed it, while their females admired them for their prowess. Although war has traveled far from its primitive beginnings, these ancient motives still survive and must be remembered by those who wish war to cease. Only international socialism will afford a complete safeguard against war, but National Socialism in all the principal civilized countries would, as I shall try to show, enormously diminish its likelihood. While the adventurous impulse towards war still exists in a section of the population of civilized countries, the motives producing a desire for peace are much stronger than at any time during the last few centuries. People know by bitter experience that the late war did not bring prosperity even to the victors. They realize that the next war is likely to cause a loss of life among civilians to which there has been nothing comparable in magnitude at any time or in intensity since the 30 Years' War, and that this loss will probably be by no means confined to one side. They fear that capital cities may be destroyed and a whole continent lost to civilization. The British, in particular, are aware that they have lost their age-long immunity from invasion. These considerations have produced in Great Britain a passionate desire for peace, and in most other countries a feeling of the same sort, though perhaps less intense. Why, in spite of all of this, is there an imminent danger of war? The proximate cause, of course, is the harshness of the Versailles Treaty, with the consequent growth of militant nationalism in Germany. But a new war would probably only produce an even harsher treaty than that of 1919, leading to an even more virulent reaction on the part of the vanquished. And we did indeed see that, right? What he is talking about now is the end of World War I, and we very shortly after this got World War II. That was due to the sanctions being placed upon Germany in large part, not entirely, but the economic repercussions from World War I, keeping Germany in such terrible conditions, led to the national fervor that led to the rise of socialism, not fascism, but socialism in Germany. Right, I know people think that Nazis were fascists, but they weren't, right? They didn't make a pretense at capitalism. It was state control. Permanent peace cannot issue from the endless seesaw. And also, they weren't national. They were attempting to take international, right? They weren't focused on their country, but the acquirement of other countries, which is, again, not a fascist thing. Fascist is nationalist and racist, right? If they were concerned only with Germans in Germany, you could make the argument that they were fascists despite the heavy market controls. But because they are international, trying to take control of other people's countries, and the economic control was there, they can definitely be made socialism.
Permanent peace cannot issue from this endless seesaw, but only from the elimination of the causes of enmity between nations. In the present day, these causes are mainly to be found in the economic interest of certain sections, and are therefore only to be abolished by a fundamental economic reconstruction. Let us take the iron and steel industry as the most important example of the way in which economic forces promote war. The essential fact is that with modern technique, the cost of production per ton is less if a vast quantity is produced than if the output is smaller. Consequently, there is a profit if the market is sufficiently large, but not otherwise. The United States steel industry, having a home market which far exceeds all others, has so far had little need to trouble itself with politics, beyond interfering when necessary to block schemes of naval disarmament. But the German, French, and British steel industries all have a smaller market than their technical needs demand. They could, of course, secure certain advantages by amalgamation, but to this there are also economic objections. A great part of the demand for steel is connected with preparations for war, and, therefore, the steel industry as a whole profits by nationalism and the increase of national armaments. Moreover, both the Comité des Forges and the German Steel Trust hope, by war, to crush their rivals instead of having to share profits with them. And, as the expense of war will fall mainly on others, they reckon that they may find the result financially advantageous. Probably they are mistaken, but the mistake is one which is natural to bold and self-confident men intoxicated with power. The fact that the vitally important Lorraine ore is in territory formerly German but now French increases the hostility of two groups and serves as a constant reminder of what can be achieved by war. And naturally, the Germans are the more aggressive, since the French already enjoy the spoils of the late war. It would, of course, be impossible for the steel industry and the other industries which have similar interests to cause great nations to serve their purposes if there were not impulses in the population to which they could appeal. In France and England, they can appeal to fear. In Germany, to resentment against injustice, and these motives, on both sides, are perfectly valid. But if the matter could be given calm consideration, it would be obvious to both sides that an equitable agreement would make everybody happier. There is no good reason why the Germans should continue to suffer injustice, nor, if the injustice were removed, would they still have any reasonable excuse for behaving so as to inspire fear in their neighbors. But whenever an effort is made to be calm and reasonable, propaganda intervenes in the shape of appeals to patriotism and national honor. The world is in the condition of a drunkard anxious to reform, but surrounded by kind friends offering him drinks, and therefore perpetually relapsing. In this case, the kind friends are men who make money out of his unfortunate propensity, and the first step in his reformation must be to remove them. It is only in this sense that modern capitalism can be regarded as a cause of war. It is not the whole cause, but it provides an essential stimulus to the other causes. If it were no longer in existence, the absence of this stimulus would quickly cause men to see the absurdity of war, and to enter upon such equitable agreements as would make its future occurrence improbable. The complete and final solution of the problem presented by the steel industry and others having similar interests is only to be found in international socialism, that is to say, in their operation by an authority representing all the governments concerned. But nationalization in each of the leading industrial countries would probably suffice to remove the pressing danger for war. For if the management of the steel industry were in the hands of the government, and the government were democratic, it would be conducted not for its own benefit, but for the benefit of the nation. In the balance sheet of the public finances, profits made by the steel industry at the expense of other parts of the community would be offset by losses elsewhere, and as no individual's income would fluctuate with the gains or losses of one separate industry, no one would have any motive in pushing the interest of steel at the public expense. The increased production of steel, due to an increase of armaments, would appear as a loss, since it would diminish the supply of consumable commodities to be distributed among the population. In this way, public and private interests would be harmonized, and the motive for deceptive propaganda would disappear. It remains to say something as to the way in which socialism would remedy the other evils we have been considering. In place of the pursuit of profits as the guiding motive in industry, there will be government planning. While the government may miscalculate, it is less likely to do so than a private individual because it will have fuller knowledge. And once again, we have proven that to be not the case. You can look at every single institution of communism or socialism anywhere on the planet and find out that this is incorrect. Central planning has failed every single time that it has been attempted. Every single time. Every single time. When the price of rubber was high, everybody who could planted rubber trees, with the result that, after a few years, the price fell disastrously, and it was found necessary to make an agreement restricting the output of rubber. A central authority, which possesses all the statistics, can prevent this sort of miscalculation. Nevertheless, unforeseen causes such as new inventions may falsify even the most careful estimates. In such cases, the community as a whole gains by making the transition to new processes a gradual one. And in regard to those who, at any moment, are unemployed, it will be possible under socialism to adopt measures which, at present, are impossible owing to the fear of unemployment and the mutual suspicions of employees and employed. When one industry is decaying and another expanding, the younger men can be taken out of the decaying industry and trained in the expanding one. Learn to code, right? Most of the unemployment can be prevented by shortening the hours of labor. When no one can be found for a man, when no work can be found for a man, he will receive full wages nonetheless, since he will be paid for willingness to work. That's going to go well. Insofar as work has to be enforced, it will be enforced by the criminal law, not by economic sanctions. That's going to go well too. It will be left to those who do the planning and therefore ultimately to the popular vote to strike a balance between comfort and leisure. If everyone works 4 hours a day, there will be less comfort than if everybody works 5. Yeah. One may expect that technological improvements will be utilized partly to provide more comfort and partly to provide more leisure. Economic insecurity will no longer exist, except insofar as there may still be danger of war, since everyone will receive a salary so long as he is not a criminal, and the expense of children will be borne by the state. Wives will not be dependent upon husbands, nor will children be allowed to suffer seriously for their parents' defects. There will be no economic dependence of one individual upon another, but only of all individuals upon the state. While socialism exists in some civilized countries but not in others, there will still be a possibility of war, and the full benefits of the system will not be realizable. But I think it may be safely assumed that each country which adopts socialism will cease to be aggressively militaristic. No, that is proven again untrue, and will be genuinely concerned only to prevent aggression on the part of others. When socialism has become universal throughout the civilized world, the motives for large-scale wars will probably no longer have sufficient force to overcome the very obvious reasons for preferring peace. Socialism, I repeat, is not a doctrine for the proletariat only. By preventing economic insecurity, it is calculated to increase the happiness of all but the handful of the richest people. And if, as I firmly believe, it can prevent first-class wars, it will immeasurably increase the well-being of the whole world. For the belief of certain industrial magnates that they could profit by another great war, in spite of the economic argument by which their view can be made to seem plausible, is an insane delusion of megalomaniacs, and again with the opinions. It is really the case, as communists maintain, that socialism, a system so universally beneficent and so easy to understand, a system, moreover, recommended by the obvious breakdown of the present economic regime and by pressing danger of universal disaster through war, is it really the case that this system cannot be presented persuasively except to proletarians and a handful of intellectuals, and can only be introduced by means of a bloody, doubtful, and destructive class war? I, for my part, find this impossible to believe. Socialism, in some respects, runs counter to ancient habits, in every respect, and therefore rouses an impulsive opposition which can only be overcome gradually, and in the minds of its opponents has become associated with atheism and a reign of terror. With religion, socialism has nothing to do. It is an economic doctrine, and a socialist might be a Christian or a Mohammedan, a Buddhist or a worshipper of Brahma, without any logical inconsistency. That is not necessarily true. As for the reign of terror, there have been many reigns of terror in recent times, mostly on the side of reaction, and where socialism comes as a revolt against one of these, it is to be feared that it will inherit some of the fierceness of the previous regime. But in countries which still permit some degree of free thought and free speech, I believe that the socialist case can, with ardor and patience combined, be so presented as to persuade much more than half of the population. If, when that time comes, the minority illegally appeals to force, the majority will, of course, have to use force to suppress the rebels. But if the previous work of persuasion has been adequately performed, rebellion ought to be so obviously hopeless that even the most reactionary would not attempt it, or, if they did, they would be defeated so easily and quickly that there would be no occasion for a reign of terror. While persuasion is possible and a majority are still unpersuaded, the appeal to force is out of place. When a majority have been persuaded, the matter can be left to the ordinary operation of democratic government, unless lawless persons see fit to raise an insurrection. The suppression of such an insurrection would be a measure such as any government would undertake, and socialists have no more occasion to appeal to force than have other constitutional parties in democratic countries. And if socialists are ever to have force at their command, it is only by previous persuasion that they can acquire it. It is customary in certain circles to argue that, while socialism might, perhaps, at one time, have been secured by the ordinary methods of political propaganda, the growth of fascism has now made this impossible. As regards the countries that have fascist governments, this is, of course, true, since no constitutional opposition is possible. But in France, Great Britain, and the United States, the matter is otherwise. In France and Great Britain, there are powerful socialist parties. In Great Britain and America, the communists are numerically negligible, and there is no sign that they are gaining ground, as should be. They have just suffered to provide the reactionaries with an excuse for mildly repressive measures, but these have not been sufficiently terrifying to prevent the revival of the Labor Party or the growth of radicalism in the United States. It is far from improbable that socialists will soon be a majority in Great Britain. That unfortunately has become true. They will then, no doubt, encounter difficulties in carrying out the policy, and more something may try to make these difficulties an excuse for postponement, mistakenly, for while persuasion unavoidably is gradual, the final transition to socialism must be swift and sudden. But there is, as yet, no good grounds for supposing that constitutional methods will fail, and there is much less for supposing that any others have a better chance of success. On the contrary, every appeal to unconstitutional violence helps on the growth of fascism. Whatever may be the weaknesses of democracy, it is only by means of it and by the help of the popular belief in it that socialism can hope to succeed in Great Britain or America. Whoever weakens the respect for democratic government is, intentionally or unintentionally, increasing the likelihood not of socialism or communism, but of fascism. And that is going to bring us to the end of this study, right? The case for socialism. And we're going to talk real quick, but hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. In order to understand the true fallacy of this last part, we need only to look at the United Soviet States, right? The USSR, the Republic of the United Soviet States, or however it was termed back then, I forget. But what happened? The democratic process decided that they were going to institute communism, not socialism, but they're kissing cousins. And once again, you can see them, they're around, but you don't want to be around them, right? They decided to institute communism, and what was the very first thing that happened? They killed people. They went in great number. You had the numbers to democratically decide this, and then they decided, okay, in order to roll this out, we're going to get rid of all the artists. First ones to die was all of the artists. Second up was all of the landowners, the people who actually understood how to plant crops. Right? The people who had been farming for generations and were quite good at it. Those people died too. In order to roll out your procedures, you have to kill people, right? That is the part that he is leaving out. Well, we can convince over half the people, right? So you got 51% in your democracy. And you decide that you're going to get rid of the rule of law, right? The Constitution in the United States, 51% of people just decide to go with socialism. So you have to get rid of the Constitution, right? That's literally no longer relevant. Then you have to kill everybody, the 49% who oppose you. It is not ever going to be some bloodless revolution, because in order for the government to control things, you have to squash anybody who opposes that. And I'm not talking about just kind of putting them down. I'm talking about squashing them, like literally making them a paste and removing them from existence. Because as long as they're alive, they can make the argument against you, and they might persuade somebody. You can vote your way into socialism, you can vote your way into communism, but you cannot vote your way out of it. The government will stop you. It is, and always will be, control. And control is going to control you. It's going to control your neighbor, and you may be happy about that. But it's going to control you, and you will be less happy about that. When the government comes in and they say, this field full of food that you produced, right? You planted the food. You tended the crops. You harvested the crops. But the government comes in and says, okay, you don't get to keep any of that. We're going to send that off to another place and you're going to starve. We decided that you don't need to eat. That has happened. Look up the Holodomor. If you are unfamiliar, that is literally a thing that happened. They intentionally starved millions of people. More people have died for communism and socialism than died in the American Civil War and World War I and World War II put together. That is incontrovertible facts. That is what happens when this rolls out. And we have the lens of history to look through. He didn't, right? These were brand new concepts. And as a brand new concept, it's easy to understand misunderstanding it. People have not put the time or the thought into it. But now, today in 2025, we have evidence. We can look back on every single instance of where it is rolled out and see how the people lived, and it was not in comfort, ever, at all. The only way that we will alleviate poverty is by more capitalism. It may seem counterintuitive to you if you believe in communism, but we have already effected more change through capitalism than in the entire history of the world. More people are able to rise now than ever in the history of ever. You are more in control of your destiny now than anyone has ever been 200 years ago and going back. That is only because we respect the rule of law. It is because the Constitution is the law of the land, and we have people willing to die to defend that. I am willing to die to defend that. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said. As long as it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me deal with in the same manner we are doing here, drop that down below as well. We will be getting to Saint Simon and to Charles Fourier. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks, because I am definitely not a socialist. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.